Week 7 of the fantasy football season, and here's the top 12 tight ends I'm ranking this week. So this year we know tight end's been a pretty weak position, and it's hard to find consistent guys, but hopefully this top 12 will help owners this week. The first guy, Mark Andrews of the Baltimore Ravens. So Mark Andrews, we know he's a 1-2 option each and every week, and a guy pretty much you could pencil in for 8-9 catches a week, 80-90 yards, and the end zone. And this week here versus the Cleveland Browns, I know it's a division ball game, but they got no one over there that really could stop Mark Andrews. So this week here, I think it's another big week for him. And I got him at 1. Number 2, Travis Kelce of the Kansas City Chiefs. So a matchup nightmare. One of the best tight ends we've ever seen possibly in pro football here is Travis Kelce. I know it's a tough matchup with the San Francisco 49ers, but a guy like Travis Kelce, he's matchup proof, and he's a guy that'll put up those top numbers each and every week here. And at the Niners, I think they're going to lean on him heavily, especially if they stop that run game and a lot of red zone and end zone targets. It will be for Kelce. Number 3, staying in the same game, George Kittle of the San Francisco 49ers. So last week, finally the best game of the season here for Kittle. He missed the first 2 weeks of the season with injury, and I think it took him a few weeks to get acclimated and get 100% healthy maybe. So right now, versus a Kansas City team that's beatable in the linebacker position, I think George Kittle's a guy they lean on heavily if they want to keep up on the scoreboard, and this one is Jimmy Garoppolo and the San Francisco 49ers. And this week here, I bump him up to 3. Number 4, Zach Ertz of the Arizona Cardinals. So Zach Ertz, he puts up double-digit fantasy points up each and every week, and he's been one of the most consistent tight ends besides the big 2 guys in Andrews and Kelce this season. I know DeAndre Hopkins is coming back. I know they traded for Robbie Anderson, but targets are leaving as well, with Hollywood Brown obviously out 6 weeks. So Zach Ertz, you fire him up once again as a top option. I got him in number 4. This New Orleans team, they don't really stop many players at all here. Even though last week I know Hayden Hurst had a down game, but Zach Ertz is a better tight end than Hurst, and he fits this scheme in Arizona perfectly. So I got him at 4. Number 5, Darren Waller, Las Vegas Raiders. So it's been a disappointing year for Waller, no doubt about it. And we don't know if he's 100% coming out of the bye week, where he left in week's 5 game injury versus the Kansas City Chiefs. So right here, Waller, if he can't get the job this week versus Houston, if he plays in this one, he's a guy that's a low-end option at tight end. Right now, Devontae Adams is pretty much hogging all the targets and getting all the yards, it seems like, in that passing game, a majority of it over there in Las Vegas. And guys like Darren Waller and Hunter Renfrow, their fantasy value is definitely taking a hit, but this week with a plus matchup and maybe the bye week to iron things out here, I got Waller at 5, but after this, if he don't show up, he'll drop down in the rankings. Number 6, TJ Hockenson of the Detroit Lions. So Hockenson, we know he went for a monster ball game a few weeks ago, where he had 40 fantasy points in that one. So this week here, tough matchup at the Dallas Cowboys. They're a pretty stout unit, no doubt about it. They got monsters on that defense, Micah Parsons, Van Der Esch, who could cover tight ends in coverage down the field here. But I still like Hockenson. Tight end's a weak position, like I mentioned. And Jared Goff, his favorite targets are Amon St. Brown, obviously, and TJ Hockenson. So even with the tough matchup, just the landscape of tight end is weak, and I got him at 6. Number 7, Robert Tonyan of the Green Bay Packers. So Robert Tonyan last week, a monster ball game and a breakout game for him. And it's surprising to me he's still available in about 50% of fantasy leagues. Last week, after coming off that 10-catch, 90-yard game, I know it was a fluky game most likely, but that's a guy that's been a starter all season for this Packer team. And maybe finally he's almost 100% healthy coming off the ACL. So last week versus a pretty stout Jet defense, he put up those numbers. And this week here, he's got a great matchup with the Washington Commanders, where I think he could exploit those linebackers and safeties in this one. And Aaron Rodgers, he pretty much only trusts Tonyan for a certain degree and Alan Lazard. So right here, Tonyan bumped up the list after the big performance. And number 7, number 8, David Njoku of the Cleveland Browns. I'm not a big Njoku guy. If you've been listening to the channel for a few years, and even recently, I keep repeating it, but Njoku, he's been putting up borderline numbers here, and a guy with at least 8 or more fantasy points in the last month of the season. So this week here, a mediocre matchup at division rival, the Baltimore Ravens. But Jacoby Brissett, his top 2 targets are obviously Amari Cooper and Njoku, and if they got any chance of winning this game, he's got to go back to the well, and he's going to have to force and pepper some targets these guys' way. So right here, David Njoku this week, I think he could be a decent option once again, and I think he could reach at least that 8-point threshold or more. Number 9, Kyle Pitts and a Falcons. So Kyle Pitts, it's been a down year for him, no doubt about it. and it's not pretty much all his fault. Marcus Mariota, he just don't throw for a lot of yards. He runs a lot of plays, and they run the football at least 30 times with their two running backs in Algier and Huntley, it seems like, over there in Atlanta. But this week here, he's got to beat a matchup with the Cincinnati Bengals. I know Pitts last week, he only had 20-plus yards with a touchdown in this one. But, hey, at least he found the end zone. And he's a guy that's a big playmaker. As long as Mariota could find new ways to get him the football, he could jump back up that tight end ranking board in the next few weeks. But right here, I'm going to play it with number 10, Gerald Everett of the Los Angeles Chargers. So the last couple weeks here, Gerald Everett, you're saying, yeah, he hasn't done much. A 2-point fantasy game. And then last week on Monday Night Football versus the Broncos, he only had 7.5 in that one. But this week here versus former team, the Seattle Seahawks, it's a good matchup on paper. They give up the most fantasy points to tight ends on the season. And if it's one game that Everett's going to break out and have a huge fantasy game, it would be this one, and Keenan Allen possibly coming back as well in this one, which could open the middle of the field up even more for Gerald Everett. And I've said this many times about Everett. He's a good, talented tight end. He's a guy that even could play wide receiver if you really needed to him. That's how good he could run the routes, and that's the breakaway speed and catching ability of Gerald Everett. So this week here with a plus matchup for Seattle, if he would break out, this would be the time to do it, where they give up the most fantasy points to tight ends on the season. Number 11, Evan Ingram of the Jacksonville Jaguars. To talk about a former team in a revenge type of game here, Evan Ingram has it versus his former team, the New York Giants, that had high hopes for him the first few seasons, but Ingram, he never panned out as a top guy over there for this New York Giant team. So the last couple games here, the Ingram, he's been on the fantasy radar. 5 versus the Texans, 10 targets in that one, 6 catches, 69 yards. In week 6 at the Indianapolis Colts, another 6 targets, 5 catches, 40 yards. So you're saying those numbers ain't all that great. But like I said, this tight end position has been one of the weakest I've seen it in many seasons in fantasy football. Quarterback and tight ends have been hard to come by this year here. And these guys, you're just going to have to roll with them. So Evan Ingram, the last 2 weeks, 16 targets total. Last 2 weeks, 21 fantasy points total in PPR leagues. And this week here versus former team, the New York Giants, I think he could get something cooking with this Jacksonville Jaguar team versus the Giants. And plus, the other thing is, Christian Kirk and him are the top 2 target guys on this roster. So you got to play the volume. And I got him in number 11, and the 12th and final tight end I have this week ranks Hayden Hurst of the Cincinnati Bengals. I know Hayden Hurst had a couple decent games a few weeks ago, but last week he dudded out in a matchup where people thought he would have a good one versus New Orleans Saints for Hayden Hurst. But this week here, another guy with a revenge game versus a former team. A lot of guys versus former teams this week, especially at the tight end position, oddly enough. So right here, Hurst, he came off 2 double-digit games, week 4 and week 5, and then put in that dud in week 6 with only 3 catches, 21 yards. But right here, his former team, the Atlanta Falcons, do give up the 4th most fantasy points to tight ends on the season. So right here, I think Hurst can have a good ball game, and I wouldn't be surprised in this one if he could have 30 or 40 yards and find pay dirt. So that's the top 12 tight ends I'm ranking here for week 7 of the fantasy football season.